Yeah. So the second part of the day and the second part of short format talks starts now. We have a great set of speakers and artists with us in this session, and I'm sure all of us are eager to listen to them. For the sake of avoiding background noise and help us keeping time, all participants are requested to stay on mute through the duration of the talks. Any questions you may have for the speaker may be addressed via chat. Each speaker will speak for the allocated duration of 15 minutes or less. We have a lot of speakers, especially in this slot, so please I request you all to be mindful of your time slots. And speakers may choose to respond to the listeners later via chat. And speakers, please note that I will support you in keeping time by giving you a time check on private chat once you're past 10 minutes into the talk. So please keep an eye on private chat. Let's dive right in, and I invite our first speaker to join us. Starting us off is Alexandra Foster. She's a young design professional living in Washington, D.C., and has worked with congregations from many faiths to consult on places of worship, including churches, synagogues, mosques, and a stupa. These experiences shape her unique perspective on interfaith dialogue, and the title of her talk today is An Architecture for Dialogue. Alex, as soon as you are done with your coffee, you can start.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quickly.
Sure.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or for me, good morning. I'm really happy to be here with you guys, especially talking about two of my favorite things, good design and good dialogue. So before we begin, I want to ask you to take a moment to remember a space that left you breathless, an instant where your surroundings were so overwhelmingly beautiful that in a second you really had no words. Now reflect on a space that you had a particularly memorable spiritual experience. Call to mind your surroundings. Perhaps you were in a religious building, out in nature, a pilgrimage site, maybe in your car driving to work. Does this impact your encounter with faith? And then finally, recall a space where you had a meaningful conversation that transformed the way you see something in your life. When we approach a new interaction, we carry our identity and our traditions, our memories, even our biases. But without a safe space for authentic expression, too often our interactions deteriorate into one-sided debate or trite aphorisms. As interfaith leaders, when you facilitate interfaith encounters, you can't control the outcome of the discussion, but you can create opportunities and conducive environments for meaningful experiences with lasting consequences. This is not new information, though. For millennia, we've constructed buildings to frame and guide our conversations with the divine. Each faith tradition has developed a particular building typology dedicated to worship, specifically designed to enhance our spiritual encounters. But for nearly as long, we've constructed spaces designed for people to communicate. Think of our government buildings, our deliberative assemblies, our courtrooms. Each is designed, sorry, there's got a message. In a world as polarized as our own, isn't it time for us to be talking about spaces for orienting us towards productive interpersonal understanding and discussion? Just paraphrase Ibn Patel, dialogue is any encounter in which we collectively shape another's consciousness, and the civic landscape is any place where interpersonal interaction occurs. So it follows that dialogue is not only a fundamental part of our society, but also an integral element of our built environment. So as we explore the relationship between space and dialogue, we ask ourselves two questions. First, can our spaces reinforce a foundation to promote dialogue? And second, can architecture be a tool to mobilize peace and relationship building by framing opportunities for productive and transformative interactions? To create a supportive setting, William Isaac explains, transformative contact presupposes that you've created an environment where several qualities can occur. First, respect between the participants. Second, the ability to listen. And finally, the opportunity to suspend judgment before authentically sharing one's experience. So together, let's examine a few buildings that exemplify these attributes, providing conditions to push dialogue beyond superficial gestures. A place for dialogue first must legitimize each person's identity and experience. We make better spaces and conversations when we understand the people that we design for, their motivation, worldviews, and traditions. Jean Nouvel explains, culture is always a link between the different civilizations. It may be the first way of understanding each other through the expressions of sensitivity. At the Institute of the Modern Arab World, Built in a collaboration between the French government and the Arab League, Jean Nouvel's design demonstrates how architecture can celebrate culture and honor tradition while making it accessible to unfamiliar audiences. In this project, Nouvel incorporates a grid module traditionally found in Arab religious and civic structures to a geometric theme. This is highlighted along the iconic facade, which incorporates traditional mashrabiyya patterns to filter light into the library. The second aspect, together these portions integrate the building seamlessly within the Parisian context, simultaneously celebrating the beauty of the cultural tradition. The second aspect of successful design dialogue is creating a space where we can listen with intensity. It is a place that forces us to be present, to listen without being distracted by thinking about our next response or clever defense. It's a functional requirement of getting occupants to fully participate in enabling channels of hearing, allowing people the time to experience and through encounters learn to be inquisitive. So, Liebskind's extension of the Jewish Museum in Berlin uses circulation to compel people to listen to the story of the German Jewish history and experience. Visitors enter through the old building, descending down a narrow staircase into a dark linear passage where, insulated from distractions, participants can focus on understanding the visceral accounting of the Holocaust. By organizing exhibits along this axis, everyone slows down. They take a minute to absorb powerful visuals and adjacent installations. As they continue up 3 flights of stairs into a winding, narrow corridor, they're so immersed in this repetitive, almost meditative action of walking that we're confronted with the jagged voids in the monolithic walls. People, unencumbered by preconceived inferences, pause to look objectively and listen intensely. Now, finally, dialogue requires that we pause after hearing and before we authentically voice our experience. Architecture inherently has the potential to suspend judgment and challenge our assumptions by presenting something familiar in a new way. As the poet Seamus Heaney explains, debate doesn't really change things, it gets you bogged down. If you can address or reopen a subject with something new, something from a different angle, then there's some hope, something that takes your eyes away from the obsession of the moment. Architecture reframes the way we see reality, and it can have a profound effect on the way people understand the world and form opinions, even about familiar subjects. So when David Adjaye, one of my favorite architects, was commissioned to replace an underused library in Whitechapel, he used a design to transform the existing expression of a library within the community. Instead of mimicking the impressive concrete monoliths that particularly built, Adjaye proposed a modern transparent cube called an idea store. He invoked a new way of thinking about the institution of a library. And instead of a dusty book warehouse, it had crystalline transparency and highlighted the collaborative events inside, welcoming the community into participation and celebrating the treasure of knowledge. This rebranding and recontextualization of a familiar model allowed the community to suspend their existing preconceptions of the library and allow the community to reframe and create a renewed desire to engage. So now that we've established the prerequisites for building a foundation for meaningful interactions, let's address the second question. How can our spaces lead us through productive dialogue experience? In 2017, when we began designing a case study proposal for an interreligious dialogue center in Washington, D.C., the initial focus was to create a worship space that supported 3 religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. As we began researching the context in which we were designing, the results were staggering. We found that not only were religiously motivated hate crimes on the rise in DC, but that many residents had alarmingly negative opinions of people that practice faith traditions other than their own. Digging deeper, as you probably know, research shows that there's a correlation between negative perceptions and the lack of encounters. It didn't help that the concentration of religious centers in DC are largely isolated and reduces the opportunities for organic interfaith encounters. So it helped us identify the problem. We don't talk, so we just don't get along. So at this point, we realized that the project was about more than simply placing 3 different communities under one roof. We were going to need to be intentional and methodical about designing interactions. So we created a program by repurposing Literact's peace building pyramid to identify key stakeholders in the community and the type of interactions, and therefore the dialogues that we needed to account for. Then we could extrapolate a catalog of spaces strategically tailored to mobilize existing networks of communication, address various scales and types of interaction, and anticipate challenges that might inhibit participation. On the site, we also began arranging the sacred spaces for each tradition in a triangle to emphasize their quality, and then we adjusted the orientation to support the liturgical tradition. Finally, we elongated each structure to create shared space. The resulting forms evoke imagery of the 3 interlocking ranks, emphasizing independence of the 3 distinct religions, but that they're united in a collective mission. Each ring is developed to celebrate the individual faith identity. Inside, so it comes out like this. Inside the building, we wanted the architecture to be a guide. It needs to lead new visitors through 4 distinct phases of dialogue. Otto Scharmer's theory on fields of conversation explains this is a result of a progression culminates in the creation of an environment for authentic dialogue, where, he explains, the intensities of human activity can safely emerge. So let's follow a hypothetical small group through this process. In Scharmer's first phase, this space for civility, participants generally adhere to the general established social niceties. This isn't where transformational change happens, but it's crucial to set the stage for interactions that evolve into deeply engaged listening. In our case study, this is where our group enters a facility, beginning its dialogic journey. It is essential to be transparent about the goals and the process. As the group progresses from the entry vestibule across the open seating area, participants get a glimpse of the atrium, establishing a visual outline of the phases to follow. Within this semi-public space, newcomers don't feel trapped and enclosed. In the open nature of the experience, participants stick to surface-level inquiries, though. These interactions lack deep thought and controversy, but at this stage, it's more important that the small group bonds and begins to create relationships. In the next phase, this space for authenticity, if no holds barred, it's time for people to share what they're thinking. Here they progress through an exhibition space dedicated to sharing stories of others' religious traditions. These artistic expressions and stories stimulate a discussion anonymously while breaking through the surface level politeness, initiating a deeper conversation, perhaps provoking people to air grievances and voice biases. As questions and tensions inevitably arise, the goal is to channel the emotion into inquiry by providing safe options for discussion. The semi-public discussion area is located throughout the center of the gallery, not only to encourage others to join the conversation as they walk through, but the open setting can empower participants who might be fearful to engage in without feeling trapped. In contrast, the private discussion rooms allow the small group to engage in more heated and emotional discussions without feeling outside judgment. Now, as the participants have vulnerably exposed their opinions and beliefs, it's time to progress into the third phase, the space for curiosity. This is where they begin to connect interpersonally. Participating in interactive displays, they share their personal experiences, shifting the subject from religious stereotypes and preconceived notions to interpersonal discussion. Interspersed in this space are areas for reflection, allowing groups to take a pause to slow them down and give them the opportunity to reflect. And finally, the group members can invite each other to share an experience of their own religious tradition. As they progress to the third floor, individuals can participate at whatever level they feel most comfortable, either by joining a group or that is hosting them, or by observing it from the other side of the glass. At last, our group descends back in a central atrium where they reach the final phase, the generative space. Our small group members now feel comfortable enough to ask the difficult questions without feeling judged or pigeonholed. The challenge here is to help the group maintain perspective they develop throughout this journey before they reintegrate into the patterns of their everyday lives. In this atrium, the culmination of their journey, the group members pause to take in the architecture. We began this whole process with a poem by Rumi. It said, "Sunlight looks a little different on this wall than it does on that wall, and a lot different on another one, but still one light." We're really inspired by that, because while a building alone isn't a solution for interreligious reconciliation, we do believe that design can mobilize peace and relationship building by facilitating and framing opportunities for productive and transformative reactions. By developing architecture that educates, prompts joint action, and celebrates the individual and cultural dignity, we do hope that designers and everyone has a role in resolving both misunderstandings that lead to suspicion and the generalizations that create fear. The issue is not that we're different, rather it's that we don't take the time to understand our differences, to forge relationships and collaborate. It's not about all of us being the same, it's about embracing the light of our joint humanity, which, to paraphrase Rumi, looks a little bit different reflected on each wall. And that'll be it.
That was crisp and really refreshingly different perspective from the kind of discussions that are usually had in interfaith spaces. Not many people talk about architecture, so thank you, Alex, for bringing that to our forum. We now move on to our second speaker, Dr. Jayanti Chavan. She is the founder president of the Institute of Science and Religion, Navi Mumbai, since its inception in 2005. Her academic background has a rare blend of mathematics, computer applications, philosophy, and religion, and a doctorate in philosophy. Our talk today is based on the teachings of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakura and is titled Uniting Faiths, Respecting the Difference. Dr. Jayanti.
Thank you, Urmi. Dear brothers and sisters, the title of my talk is Uniting Faiths and Respecting the Difference. This is based on the teachings of the great philosopher saint Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura from Gaudiya Vaishnava Vedanta School of Thought. So briefly, I would like to introduce about GVV, what we call Gaudiya Vaishnava Vedanta and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura. Among the 6 main branches of Hindu philosophy, Vedanta is accepted as the most comprehensive and universal school of thought. Vedanta has 2 broad schools, namely monotheistic like Vaishnavism and monistic like the Advaita school. Srila Ramanujacharya, Srila Madhvacharya are the proponents of the Vaishnavism, and Srila Adi Shankara was the chief proponent of Advaita school of thought. These 3 are accepted as the authority of Vedanta with regard to philosophy and praxis. Hence, their lineage of unbroken chain of Guru Shishya system is also accepted as the authority for philosophy and practices. Gaudiya Vaishnava Vedanta, what we call as GVV, is a subsect of Srila Madhvacharya's Vaishnava Vedanta school. It was propounded by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who appeared in the lineage of Srila Madhvacharya during the 15th century. At that time, he brought a renaissance of Prema Bhakti, flooding the society with love of God. Sri Chaitanya thus inaugurated the universal Sankirtan movement to awaken dormant love of God and proclaimed it as the primary goal of religion for entire humanity. Its focus is to explore the inner world towards scientific understanding of the highest knowledge of his inner spiritual nature through his natural relation with God based on Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. As per this doctrine, every living entity or Atma identified with Jivatma has got a relation with God, and that is they are simultaneously one and different from God. They are intimately related eternally, hence this relation is permanent. This is universally applicable beyond time and space. During his time, when differences arose based on faith, he set an excellent precedent by initiating a friendly dialogue similar to present-day interfaith dialogue with the then Muslim ruler under the Mughal rule. The true goal of religion, as practically demonstrated by Sri Chaitanya and his apostles, thus laid the compass to define pure religion at spiritual level and thus universal practice religion as a way of life with responsible living. Later, from the 19th century, the important precepts of Sri Chaitanya have been systematically encapsulated as per time, place, and circumstances by the contemporary philosophers saints like Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura, his grand disciple Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, and the scientist disciple of Prabhupada, Dr. T.D. Singh, also our institute founder, and others who all appeared in the same lineage. It is a fact that it was Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura who re-established Sri Chaitanya's Bhakti movement after he appeared in the 19th century at a critical historical junction when the teachings of Sri Chaitanya had been disparaged and depreciated. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakura practically rediscovered and revived Sri Chaitanya's teaching, published the writings of his principal apostles, and proved the timeless importance and relevance of these teachings for the modern world. For my talk, I've referred largely to his publication. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura identified 3 categories of dialogue and emphasized first-class dialogue as the only way to bridge differences among religions. Based on his practices and complete mastery over Vedic scriptures, Quran, and Bible, he highlighted that the differences between religions fall under secondary characteristics, while at primary level, the essence of all religion is one and pure. His teachings convey that a pure religion functions at a spiritual plane where all living entities share a common father. Consequently, as children of one father, all are closely related to one another. This religion is only one, and God's love is exclusively experienced through this pure religion as one recognizes that he or she has an intimate relationship with one supreme being. Hence, a primary nature or dharma to serve God with love is the basis of this relationship. Further, a true religious principle is revealed to humanity through chosen saintly persons. It is a special gift of God given to humanity to enable a sincere person prepared himself or herself to experience God's love exclusively. At the same time, as part of preparation for progressive realization of pure religion, or it is called as Nitya Dharma, man is to follow certain secondary rules which largely comprise Naimitike Dharma, and these are identified with different cultures and practices associated with faiths. These are disseminated as per time, place, and circumstances by empowered saints or teachers of respective faith. The varied secondary characteristics confirms diversity leading to cultural and religious differences. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura opines that these, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur opines that these three differences must be acknowledged and respected. Why? He elaborates that though the principal nature of man is one, still all are individual. Referring to twins born from the same womb, he opines, no two people in the world will have identical spiritual or secondary qualities. Therefore, one cannot expect that people born in different countries can ever have exactly the same qualities. Moreover, different countries have different water, air, mountains, forests, vegetation, and clothing. As a result, the people of these countries have naturally developed different physics, complexions, customs, clothing, language, and food. Similarly, the people's mentality will differ. Accordingly, people's conception of God, though being primarily similar with spiritual essence, will differ in details. This gives rise to difference in the mode of worship of God. Because of these reasons, he says, we see the following differences among religions of different countries. First, difference of teachers or prophets, difference in worshippers' mentality and consequent expression of reverence, difference in procedure of worship, difference in conception of God, difference in God's name and statements due to difference in language. The first class dialogue focuses on the major commonalities among all religions, like the existence of one supreme God, existence of soul, and central principles which are common to all religions. These are moral principles like truthfulness, respect for others, tolerance, simplicity, cleanliness, and etc. Thus, the need to respect the difference in detailed process, which are often based on time, place, circumstances. As a case for practice, he said, the people of one country should give proper respect to the native saints of another country while holding strong faith to one's belief for one's progress. He should respect the teachings of saints of the country where he resides and not go to other places and preach that what his teachers have taught is superior to all other teaching. He said, indulging in useless quarreling, they betray the very goal of their own religion. However, he also said, though it is worthless to criticize a difference in religious system, but if one sees a genuine fault like blasphemy or fanatic actions, then for the benefit of mankind, one must attempt to correct the fault, but in a proper way. Quoting from Sri Chaitanya's approach, he says, while discussing with Buddhists, Jains, and others, Sri Chaitanya led them to proper path. Hence, the faith leaders have to study objectively the primary relation of man with God as well as secondary rules prescribed in their respective faiths to awaken the dormant love towards one God. They should provide basic education to their followers on these five secondary differences. Therefore, it is improper and detrimental to argue over these differences. The emphasis would be on pure religion over differences due to secondary characteristics involving physical and mental planes. If the goal of religion is pure love, then all differences can be adjusted. Srila Prabhupada practically applied the teachings of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura and brought several faiths under one umbrella. Similarly, Dr. T.D. Singh applied the teachings while engaging in dialogue with great scientists and peace leaders of various faiths. These wise and holy men had conviction that the religion of common humanity cannot be many. If all are children of one God, then the religion that upholds man's relation with one God cannot be many to the extent of opposing one another. At core, there must be only one universal religion, a pure religion that builds an interdependent, interrelated community with God in the center. Today, pluralism is a universal fact. Science and technology has transformed our Earth planet into a global village. It has also facilitated for several separate identities to express themselves and live together amicably. But here we need to note that pluralism can become a concern in the long run if mankind gets stuck up with secondary characteristics without progressing towards pure religion. Faith leaders and educators have an important role here. If God is understood without knowledge, that is avidya pratiti, many controversies may arise. But if he is understood through knowledge, vidvat pratiti, there is no place for disagreement. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura thus became a renowned bridge builder between primary and secondary characteristics of a human to achieve unity in faith amongst its diversity. He demonstrated and provided education to practice oneness in unity with diversity through the lens of a pure religion and a matured conception of God. Thank you. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jayanti. It's any moderator's dream, if people finish on time and I don't have to ask and interrupt. So thank you very much.
I must thank Rukmani for it.
No, she has been an excellent coordinator, convener, and thanks to her, we have all of you together with us today.
Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Jayanti, for that very spiritual aspect. Hi, Shashi, can you please mute yourself? Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry for the interruption. So we now move on to our musical interlude. We have with us singer-songwriter, TED speaker, and contemporary Indian vocalist, Isheeta Chakrabarti, who's trained in Hindustani classical music before chance encounters with first-generation Indian jazz icons like Carlton Kitto and Louis Banks resulted in the birth of a hybrid seed that promises to bloom into one of the most innovative and creative voices in the Indian contemporary musical landscape. Today, she will share her personal inward journey through her songs in this feature titled Bhakti or Ishq, In Search of Love through Kirtans, Kawalis, and Words of Seekers. Before I hand it over to Isheeta, I'd like to remind all our listeners to post questions in chat. Alex, there were a few comments on chat for you as well from our listeners. If you've not had a chance to look at it, please do. Dr. Jayanti, questions are coming up for you as well. Please take the time to respond, and people may toggle between speaker view, gallery view, and yes, enjoy Isheeta's performance. I'm really looking forward to it as much as anything else. Isheeta, you're out?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Take it away.
So I'm going to first start with a song and then let's see where this goes. अव्वल हमद खुदायदा विर्द कीजे अव्वल हमद खुदायदा विर्द कीजे इश्क कीता सो जगदा मोल मियां पहले आप है रब ने इश्क कीता ओ माशूक है नबी रसूल मियां पहले आप हैं रब ने इश्क कीता माशूक है नबी रसूल मियाँ इश्क पीर फकीर दा मर्तबा है मर्द इश्क दा भला रंजूल मियाँ मर्द इश्क दा भला रंजोल मियाँ हो मर्द इश्क दा भला रंजोल मियाँ ओ Um, um, those are words written by Varis Ali Shah from one of the greatest romances coming from Punjab, Heer, the story of Heer Ranjha. And this was written around the 1700s. And this part is called the Hamd. These are the opening lines of the entire poetry. And he says, the poet says, first we must acknowledge the divine. First there was God. And before everything, there was love, there was ishq. And there was ishq between Allah, Rasul Pak, and the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be unto him. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this gathering. I am not an expert on bhakti, and Lord knows I'm not an expert on ishq or love. The next few minutes, I think I'm just going to do what I do best, which is sing, interspersed with a few words of what my journey through bhakti or ishq has been. In fact, it's been an ongoing process. I have been a trained Hindustani classical singer for as long as I can remember. It's only been very recently, I think the pandemic may have something to do with it, that I truly began to embark on a certain exploration of the songs that I have been singing all this while. And most of the songs I've been singing is songs about love, divine love, songs of devotion. But what that really means, and art really has no boundaries. Art cannot be fit into any religion. Art is a religion unto itself. And as an artist, it's a very visceral feeling in our in terms of my practices, in terms of my spiritual practice, as well as my practice of my art. I believe it was Rumi who said that music is no longer an aim but a vehicle, and song is no longer an end but a transportation to the path of the divine. I think what bhakti means to me, or even ishq, and when I was working on this, I was trying to understand, is there a difference? You know, I've been speaking to some very close friends of mine, picking their brain. One of them who's here, Jitu. Is there a difference between bhakti and ishq, or love, bhakti or devotion? And somehow the word devotion for me personally doesn't really cut it. Bhakti is so much more. So, like I said, is there a difference between the two? And what keeps coming back to me is bhakti truly is a complete giving up of arrogance, of an identity. And as a musician, I've been trained for many years, and and yes, I'm a very skilled musician. You know, I've done my practices, and God has been very kind. But there's so much that gets lost in the skill, in the persona of the artist, that you miss the connection with the heart. And I think this has been a very new and very nascent journey to really discover what that connection is. What is bhakti for me? What is my relationship to the divine? So I'm going to take a break and sing you another song. This is a song called Manzile Sufi, and if I'm not mistaken, this is a song written by, it's a piece of poetry written by Ghulam Farid, where he says, I just want to dance for my beloved. I just want to be in complete abandon. I don't care who this identity is, who Ghulam Farid is. Just let me dance. And he appeals to the priest in the mosque, and he says, just let me dance. Uh, let me be the dancing girl for my beloved. Don't ostracize me, because that is how I express my love. That is how I express my devotion to the divine. So here goes. Also, since I am music, so yeah. मुल्ला मार न मैं को झिड़कू, मैं को अपना यार मनावण दे, कंजरी बन के साडी सत न घटदी, साकू नच के यार मनावण दे, जोगन थी सा यार दे पिछों, सकू गल विच माल रा पावण दे, गुलाम फरीदा ओंदियो जाने, सकू अपनी तोर निभावण दे। मैं ता कोई ख्याल, हाँ मैं ता कोई ख्याल, हाँ हुन मिल सानाल, मेल सानाल ख्याल दे, मैं ता कोई ख्याल, मैं दीदार दीदार मैं विच, मैं दीदार दीदार मैं विच, पहरम वैस विसाल, हाँ पहरम वैस विसाल, हाँ हुन मिल सानाल, मेल सानाल ख्याल दे, मैं ता कोई ख्याल, हाँ मैं ता कोई ख्याल, सचल सच करे दा ज़ाहिर, सचल सच करे दा ज़ाहिर, अल्लाह कान कताल, हाँ अल्लाह कान कताल, हाँ हुन मिल सानाल, मेल सानाल ख्याल दे, मैं ता कोई ख्याल, हाँ मैं ता कोई ख्याल, हाँ मैं ता कोई ख्याल। I think for me, the journey is still to really do away with the frills and to really connect with that deeper essence of bhakti, which is such a pure essence, which is a state of being in constant, authentic service. And I've also recently been studying, or let's say, practicing Vaishnavism, and it's very new. I practically shouldn't even be talking about it because it's so new for me. Um, right. Okay. So I have 3 minutes to go. I wanted to sing 2 lines of a Bangla Kirtan, um, and maybe end with that. So this song is called Gauranga Bolite Hobe. It's written by Narottam Das Thakur, where he says, "My the only thing I want to do in life is be in service to my Lord and take away all the vasana of this material world from me, because that is the ultimate truth." So just a little bit of that. গৌরাঙ্গ বলিতে হবে পুলক শরীর, হরি হরি বলিতে নয়নে বহিনীর. I cry taking the name of Hari. হরি হরি বলিতে নয়নে বহিনীর, আর কবে নিতাই চাঁদের করুণা হইবে, সংসার বাসনা মোর কবে তুচ্ছ হবে, বিষয় ছাড়িয়া কবে শুদ্ধ হবে মন, কবে মোহের বসে শ্রী বৃন্দাবন, কবে মোহের বসে শ্রী বৃন্দাবন, রূপ রঘুনাথ পদে রহু মোর আশ, প্রার্থনা করো এ সদা নরোত্তম দাস, প্রার্থনা করো এ সদা নরোত্তম দাস. Narottam Das Thakur was, he's the poet, sort of celebrated poet of the Vaishnav tradition, who's written so many of these kirtans. And I'm a new student of Bangla Kirtan, so I thought this would be an opportunity to present something for you. With that, I end my little session and still discovering what my relationship to the divine truly is, and where my bhakti and where my ishq really is. And neither of them have any religion, neither of them belong to anywhere else but the divine. And I'm very grateful for being a vessel, if I may say. I'm still discovering what that really means. Hopefully someday I can do away with whatever little arrogance that my identity brings me and be in complete service to my art. So thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Isheeta. That was beautiful. And we really hope you stick around. And if there's a little more time left after our next 2 speakers, and if you're around, we would love to hear more of you. I'm sure everyone agrees. So thank you so much. That was lovely. And I'd like to now, we'd like to move on to our next speakers. The first is Mr. Bhanwar. He's an award-winning writer and activist. He's considered powerful and forthright, a contemporary voice of the progressive Dalit movement in the Western Indian state of Rajasthan. His personal journey includes being actively involved with the RSS since the age of 13, to being part of the first Kar Seva that set out to demolish the Babri Masjid. And thereafter, an unforgettable incident shook the foundations of his faith in the RSS, opening his eyes to their extremist agenda. Ever since, he has worked towards boldly speaking up against their ideology, often at great personal risk to his life. Today, however, he will speak on the role of Saint Ramdev Peer in fostering interfaith harmony in Rajasthan. He will address us in Hindi, and his talk is titled राजस्थान में अंतर्धार्मिक सद्भाव बनाने में सूफी संत रामदेव पीर का योगदान. भंवर जी, are you there? आप क्या कैमरा पे? भंवर जी, आप अनम्यूट करेंगे? Yeah, please.
थैंक यू वेरी मच उर्मी जी. बहुत शुक्रिया कि पीस प्रोजेक्ट का कि ये मौका आपने दिया. मैं राजस्थान के एक ऐसे सूफी पीर जो कि संत भी हैं और पीर भी हैं और जिनको लोग देवता भी मानते हैं, रामदेव पीर, उनके बारे में बात रखूंगा आपके सामने. लगभग 600 साल पहले अभी का जो राजस्थान है उसका जो पाकिस्तान से मिला हुआ जो इलाका है बाड़मेर, रेतीला, जो पूरा डेजर्ट है, उसके एक छोटे से गांव उंडू कहमीर में रामदेव का जन्म हुआ. बचपन उनका यही बीता, लेकिन बाद में उनका जो परिवार था, उनके पिता अजमल, वो पोखरण चले गए. पोखरण आप जानते होंगे, जहां पर हमारा परमाणु का पूरा परीक्षण हुआ, उस जगह में, और वहां उनको एक छोटी रियासत मिल गई. तो रामदेव की जो परवरिश हुई बचपन में, वो एक ऐसे माहौल में हुई जहां नाथ परंपरा, सिद्ध, जो बौद्ध सिद्ध सराफा परंपरा और जो सूफी धारा है, इनका एक मिश्रित सा प्रभाव उनके परिवार पर रहा. और चूंकि वो जो समय था वो एक ऐसा उथल पुथल का समय था जब विभिन्न आध्यात्मिक धाराओं का द्वंद था आपस में, उनके बीच में कई प्रकार के आपस में झगड़े थे और हिंदू और मुस्लिम के बीच का अंतर्द्वंद बढ़ता जा रहा था. और जो सनातन हिंदुओं में निर्गुण और सगुण के जो अंतर्विरोध थे वो तो थे ही. और ये जो राजस्थान का इलाका है, इसमें वर्ण और जाति का भेदभाव के भी घटनाक्रम उसी समय बहुत मजबूत होते जा रहे थे. तो ऐसे समय में जब शांति, भाईचारा, सहिष्णुता और अहिंसा जैसे मूल्य, मानवीय मूल्य जो है वो क्षीण होते जा रहे, कमजोर होते जा रहे थे, राजस्थान में राजनीतिक, सामाजिक और आध्यात्मिक रूप से तेजी से बदलाव हो रहे थे. कुछ भी स्थायी नहीं था. लोगों में कटुता आ रही थी, नफरत पैदा हो रही थी और अविश्वास का वातावरण घर कर रहा था. औरतों को पर्दे में रखा जाने लगा था, घूंघट जैसी प्रथाएं आ गई थी और उनको धार्मिक, आध्यात्मिक चिंतन से, उपासना से, आध्यात्मिक कर्म कांडों से अलग कर दिया गया था. घरों की चार दीवारी में ही उनको एक तरीके से सीमित कर दिया गया था. जो राजा थे वो कर लाद रहे थे, ब्याजखोरी अपने चरम पर थी और किसानों की, मजदूरों की हालत बहुत गंभीर थी. ऐसे मुश्किल वक्त में, ऐसे समय में रामदेव पैदा हुए और वो बड़े हो रहे थे. दिल्ली में जो सल्तनत थी वो फिरोज शाह तुगलक का शासन था और राजस्थान का जो जोधपुर राज्य था उसमें सामंतों का राज था और हर तरफ छोटे मोटे ठाकुर, नवाब, ये सब लोग राजकाज चलाते थे. ये वो दौर था जब अभी का जो भारत और पाकिस्तान का जो रेगिस्तान है, सिंध और बाड़मेर और जैसलमेर का, ये लगभग एक ही था. उस समय सारे लोग इधर उधर आते जाते रहते थे, उनको कोई रोक टोक नहीं थी. आध्यात्मिक रूप से आप अगर देखेंगे तो जो सिंध है, जो रेगिस्तान वाला इलाका है, उसमें नाथ पंथ, सिद्ध परंपरा और सूफियों का बहुत जबरदस्त प्रभाव था. इस इलाके में उससे पहले का जो समय है वो जैन और बौद्ध धर्म की धाराओं का भी यहाँ पर बहुत प्रभाव रहा है। ऐसे समय में अगर हम देखेंगे तो रामदेव का जो जीवन काल है उसमें हिंदू, मुस्लिम, जैन और बौद्ध चारों तरह की जो धार्मिक आध्यात्मिक चिंतन धाराएं हैं, ये सब इस डेजर्ट में फल फूल रही थी और एक दूसरे से मिल रही थी। तो रामदेव जो थे वो एक छोटे राजा के बेटे थे, लेकिन उन्होंने अपना जो रास्ता चुना वो कोई राजा नहीं बने, बल्कि उन्होंने एक वीणा लिया और वीणा पर गांव गांव जा करके उन्होंने अपना आध्यात्मिक संदेश गा करके बताना और गा करके सुनाना शुरू किया, अपनी वाणियों के द्वारा, अपने भजनों के द्वारा। और उनका पूरा रास्ता जो था वो एक दूसरे समुदाय को साथ लाने का रास्ता था। और जो समाज में जिस तरह की स्थितियां फैल रही थी, जो जातिगत छुआछूत था या औरतों को एक तरफ करने की जो बात थी और हिंदू मुस्लिम के बीच में जो कटुता थी, इन सब चीजों को उन्होंने कम करने का काम किया। और एक तरीके से उन्होंने मुल्तान से लेकर के मालवा, जो कि मध्य प्रदेश में आता है, मालवा, गुजरात, राजस्थान, सिंध, मुल्तान, इन पूरे इलाकों में वो अपने घोड़े पर सवार होकर के जाते थे, वीणा ले जाते थे और आध्यात्मिक सत्संगों के जरिए लोगों को संदेश देते थे कि ये जितने भी बातें हैं सब कुछ ऊपर से हम अलग अलग हो सकते हैं, लेकिन आध्यात्मिक रूप से हम सब लोग एक ही लोग हैं, एक ही प्रकार के लोग हैं। तो एक तरीके से उन्होंने इन चार धर्मों का मिश्रण करते हुए अपनी एक विचार बनाया जिसको महाधर्म कहा गया। और वो एक तरीके से सतपंथ भी कहलाता था। और इसमें सब धर्मों के लोगों के लिए दरवाजे खुले हुए थे, सारे प्रकार के लोग उसमें आ सकते थे और सभी धर्मों की, सभी जातियों की महिलाओं को भी इसमें आकर के उपासना करने का अधिकार था। इसमें कोई वर्ण और जाति का किसी भी प्रकार का भेदभाव नहीं। रामदेव खुद एक हिंदू परिवार में जन्मे, लेकिन उन्होंने मुल्तान जाकर के सिया निजारी जो एक सूफी समुदाय है, उन सूफी पीरों से उन्होंने राब्ता कायम किया। और उनके भजनों में बार बार शाह आलम का नाम आता है, आलम राजा का नाम आता है। और वो वहीं सतपंथ में प्रविष्ट हुए और अपने इलाके में लौट करके उन्होंने उस सतपंथ का प्रचार प्रसार का काम शुरू किया और लोगों को शांति, प्रेम, भाईचारे और सह अस्तित्व का नया मार्ग बताया और आपस में लड़ने जुड़ने से उन्होंने मना किया। उसके बाद से रामदेव को हिंदू लोग बाबा रामदेव कहने लगे, लेकिन जो मुस्लिम उनके जो शागिर्द थे वो उनको रामदेव पीर कहते थे। और धीरे धीरे इन दोनों चीजों का मिश्रण हुआ और रामसा पीर के नाम से उनको लोग जानने लगे। तो रामदेव पीर ने उस समय में काफी कुछ ऐसी चीजें की जो कि आज के लिहाज से हम देखेंगे तो प्रोग्रेसिव मानी जाएगी, क्योंकि उस जमाने में जल को पार करके, समंदर पार करके व्यापार करने की मनाही थी। लेकिन उन्होंने अपने यहाँ के जो जैन व्यापारी थे उन लोगों को समंदर पार जाकर के व्यापार करने के लिए एक तरह से प्रेरित किया और उस सामाजिक प्रतिबंध को खत्म किया। ये पूरा डेजर्ट के इलाके में उन्होंने रेन वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग के बहुत सारे काम किए, कुआं, बावड़ी, तालाब का निर्माण किया और प्रकृति, पर्यावरण, पशु पक्षियों की रक्षा के लिए उन्होंने अपने जीवन में काफी काम किए। वो धार्मिक अंधविश्वासों के, रूढ़िवाद के और कट्टरपंथ के भी खिलाफ जम करके बात करते रहे। उनका जो पूरा संदेश है वो उनका एक 24 प्रमाण नाम से उनका भजन संग्रह उसमें आता है। और रामदेव पीर ने बराबरी का संदेश दिया। बराबरी जो स्त्री और पुरुष में भी, हिंदू और मुसलमान में भी, और तमाम तरह के इंसान, पशु, पक्षी और प्रकृति में भी, इस तरह की बराबरी की वो बात करते रहे। रामदेव पीर विभिन्न धर्म, मत, संप्रदायों के मध्य सबसे सुंदर सेतु के रूप में आज भी विद्यमान है। जो उन्होंने 600 साल पहले एक बात कही और लोगों को इकट्ठा लाया, आज भी हम उनके बाजार पर जाकर के देख सकते हैं कि हर साल आने वाले 35 लाख लोगों में हिंदू भी होते हैं, मुस्लिम भी होते हैं, जैन भी होते हैं, बौद्ध भी होते हैं, क्रिश्चियंस भी होते हैं और तमाम तरह की धाराओं के लोग उनके यहाँ आते हैं और उनकी मजार पर नमन करते हैं। उनका जो जगह है उस मजार पर वो भी अपने आप में एक अंतर्धार्मिक सद्भाव का एक प्रतीक है, क्योंकि मजार पर हरी चादर चढ़ाई जाती है और समाधि की जो उस समाधि है उसका आधा कलमा लिखा हुआ है। उनके जो झंडा है वो नेजा कहा जाता है और उस पर सूरज, चांद और फुट चरण चिन्ह अंकित है। उनका जो मुख्य मंदिर है उसमें 5 वक्त की पूजा पाठ होती है और ये 5 वक्त की पूजा पाठ 5 वक्त की नमाज से बिल्कुल समय से मिलती जुलती है। और उनके जो मंदिर है उनको देवरा या बारगाह कहा जाता है और उनके भजन गाने को जम्मा जागरण कहा जाता है, जो कि जुम्मे से आने वाला शब्द है। रामदेव पीर की कई साल पहले तक कोई मूर्तियां नहीं हुआ करती थी, केवल उनके मंदिरों में चरण चिन्ह हुआ करते थे और उसको अलग उपासना कहा जाता था। और ये चरण चिन्ह जो आकृतियां हैं ये बुद्ध के चरणों से बहुत साम्य रखती है। जब वो एनलाइटेंड होकर के चलते हैं 7 कदम, वो जो चरण है। इतना ही नहीं बल्कि रामदेव पीर का जो 5 रंगों का झंडा है वो बौद्ध धर्म के पंचशील के झंडे से अद्भुत रूप से समानता लिए हुए है। उनकी उपासना पद्धति में कलश है, बोधि वृक्ष के हरे पत्तों का बहुतायत में प्रयोग किया जाता है। तो ऐसा आप देख सकते हैं कि विभिन्न धर्मों का वो एक सुंदर समन्वय प्रस्तुत करते हैं। रामदेव पीर ने सदैव अहिंसा का उपदेश दिया। उन्होंने युद्धों, मारकाट का कभी समर्थन नहीं किया, बल्कि उसके विरोध में वो बात करते रहे। वो स्त्री और पुरुष की समानता के प्रबल पक्षधर थे। उन्होंने जातिगत भेदभाव और छुआछूत और धार्मिक पाखंडों और कट्टरताओं का सदैव विरोध किया। वो उस समय की जो निम्न समझे जाने वाले जो समुदाय थे उनके बीच जाकर के रात रात भर बैठ करके सत्संग करते थे, उनके बीच में खाना खाते थे और इस वजह से उनको उनके समुदाय से बाहर भी निकाला गया, एक तरीके से उनको जाति बहिष्कृत भी किया गया, लेकिन उसकी उन्होंने कोई चिंता नहीं की। उन्होंने पंडित पुजारियों के, मौलानाओं के जो पाखंड है उसके खिलाफ भी जम करके अपने सत्संगों के जरिए बात कही और वो मंदिरों में भी जाकर के अपनी बात कहते थे, मस्जिदों में जाकर के भी अपनी बात कहते रहे। तो उस दौर में 600 साल पहले हिंदू, मुस्लिम, जैन, बौद्ध, नाथ, सूफी और सिद्ध, इन तमाम धाराओं का एक सुंदर समन्वय रामदेव पीर ने किया। सनातन धर्म की जो ब्राह्मण और निर्गुण धाराएं हैं, ब्राह्मण और श्रमण धाराएं हैं, उनके बीच में भी रामदेव एक तरीके से ब्रिज के रूप में बन करके आए। नाथ, सिद्ध और सूफी परंपरा का तो सुंदर समन्वय खुद थे ही। भक्ति और सूफी दोनों धाराओं को आप उनके उसमें देख सकते हैं। मुझे लगता है कि आज भारत ही नहीं बल्कि पूरे विश्व को रामदेव पीर जैसे आइकॉन की जरूरत है, जो इस समय जिस तरह की नफरत फैल रही है, जिस तरह का हिंसा का वातावरण है, जिस तरह की धार्मिक कट्टरता की वजह से एक धर्म के लोग दूसरे धर्म के खून के प्यासे बने हुए हैं, इस समय में ऐसे लोगों की बहुत जरूरत है, रामदेव पीर जैसे लोगों की, जो एक समन्वय कर सके और सुंदर तरीके से वो आ सके वहां पर। आज भी राजस्थान में जैसलमेर जिले में पोखरण के पास जो रामदेवरा है, वह रामदेव पीर की मजार पर लाखों लोग पैदल चल करके आते हैं और उसमें हिंदू भी होते हैं, मुस्लिम भी होते हैं, जैन, बौद्ध, सिख, तमाम धाराओं के लोग होते हैं, यहाँ तक कि क्रिश्चियन लोग भी होते हैं। और भारत ही नहीं बल्कि पड़ोसी मुल्क पाकिस्तान में भी उनके 3 मेले लगते हैं सिंध के 3 जिलों में, और उसमें भी लाखों की तादाद में हिंदू और मुस्लिम मिल करके उनके बारे में बातचीत करते हैं और उनके विचारों को आगे ले जाने की कोशिश करते हैं। रामदेव पीर भले ही 600 साल पहले पैदा हुए, लेकिन उन्होंने उस समय जो एक तरीका बताया, एक जरिया बताया और जो कोशिश की उन्होंने सभी धर्मों को एक करने की, सभी जातियों को एक करने की, यहाँ तक कि जेंडर को लेकर के जिस तरह का जो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन था उसको खत्म करने की, उन सब चीजों की आज सर्वाधिक जरूरत है। आज जितना जिस तरह के नफरत से पीड़ित है पूरी मानवता, उसमें रामदेव पीर जैसे अंतर धार्मिक सद्भाव बनाने वाले सूफी वीरों की बहुत सख्त जरूरत है। धन्यवाद।
शुक्रिया भावर जी, that was very enlightening. I'll be honest, मुझे ज़्यादा पता नहीं था रामदेव पीर के बारे में, but इनका जो आइकॉनिक फिगर है इतना सिंक्रेटिक है और सीरियसली इंटरफेथ वर्क के लिए इतना मायने रखता है, तो वी डेफिनेटली लुक मोर इनटू इट। और शुक्रिया आपके समय के लिए, शुक्रिया ये बताने के लिए, और किसी दिन जरूर आपसे बातचीत करना चाहेंगे और आपके जर्नी के बारे में। आज समय थोड़ा कम था, बट बहुत अच्छा लगा सुन के, सो थैंक यू वेरी मच। I request all our participants again, if you all have questions for Bhanwar ji, to please post on chat. I think we'll also be able to have some time after Abhishek's session, who is next, and then we can come back for more questions. So the last speaker for this track is Abhishek Thakur, the founder of the Blue Ribbon Movement, which builds leadership for a better world. In 2011, he initiated the South Asian Youth Conference series on the theme of peace. He facilitates culture transformations through his work at Wisdom Tree. And today he'll be speaking to us on Indic centrism, a path to peace. Abhishek, are you around?
Yes.
Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
I am.
Thank you, Abhishek. Please take it away.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Namaste, everybody. And happy to be talking about Indic centrism, a pathway to peace. So one of the most pressing questions in my life, ever since I remember, has been around peace, coexistence, and violence. Really, the question saying, will we ever coexist as humanity with ourselves, with each other, and with nature? So my journey started out first with nature, with environment. As a 10-year-old, I was aware that a Earth Summit is happening at Rio de Janeiro. And we were all very excited about it. I was a member of the Cup Club, and I said, oh, all the countries of the world are finally coming together to protect the environment. And yay, we're like on our way to a better world, and so on. Not only did that summit not deliver what it had promised, 20 years later in Brazil, I was at Rio Plus 20 physically, and we were again disappointed, and violence against nature was going to continue. So I realized that nature itself and man are still, or human beings are at war. So what do we do? So that was kind of one thread of my life, one question: how do we coexist with nature? From that 10, now I'm closer to 40. And over the last 30 years, one of the threads of my life has been personal growth, self-development. Early in my 20s, I was like really into self-help. I was reading 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, Anthony Robbins, and really my own success was fully pumped up. Some stage, I started realizing that this whole individualism that self-help is feeding and the strengthening of the ego that is happening as a result of all this is also causing some degree of violence between me and others, creating a distance between me and individualist self and the others, really moving me out of my connection with my community and being very narrowly focused on my achievement. It's only later that I looked at self-help and saw how it's closely linked, a lot of modern self-help closely linked to capitalism and closely linked to how achievement is made an individual endeavor. So that was me trying to figure out how my own ego and its aspects of violence actually pan out. So there was violence against nature. There was violence that I cause with my overinflated ego. And the third and the trickiest one is the violence with each other. I was 20 and I was a part of a youth organization, got stuck into the politics of the organization. And I was so troubled by it, saying that, we're so engrossed in ourselves. That's not acceptable. So I initiated Blue Ribbon, saying, it'll be like a politics-free organization with a dream of green India, great India, and we'll all exist happily thereafter. Of course, now I know better that wherever human beings come together, conflict is inevitable. It's bound to happen. But during my 20s, also, I had a chance to be a part of the RSS, participate in some games that really seeded some anti-communal ideas in me at that time, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And eventually, I just realized that our interpersonal issues and violence is also one huge bucket. So what do we do about that? By 30s, I said, okay, social enterprise movement is the answer. Let the market solve problems, create happiness and everlasting peace and joy for everybody. So we restarted Blue Ribbon. It had shut down because of some intergenerational issues. So we restarted Blue Ribbon as a social enterprise. We said we will use market forces to eliminate poverty and unhappiness and issues, only to realize that there is also systemic violence. It's not only enough that violence with each other, with myself, with nature is handled. The roots of violence are deep and systemic. There are systems which are keeping people in place in a state of poverty. There are systems that are keeping people unhealthy. There are systems that are keeping people disempowered. So moving from the social enterprise, we realize that this whole donor funded model where we are just problem solving without looking at deep systemic issues is also ultimately with its limits. And finally, Blue Ribbon became a movement, a citizen movement that makes decisions on full consent or sarvanamati. When I look at all these years, I've been a part of everything from the extreme left Asia Social Forum, where I felt most alive, to the RSS, to libertarians, to Ekta Parishad, and frontline working with tribals. And throughout, I have been asking, what is an approach that will really take us from a constant state of tension, fighting, to a state of oneness, to a state of unity? It's not a new question. So while initially I felt I was excited about the question, I realized this is like a timeless question that humanity has answered again and again in many, many different ways. And I said, but my own quest has to happen. And my own quest started with saying, how do we coexist and how do we heal these intergenerational wounds and conflicts? And really, what is an Indian way to respond to these challenges? Because I was so pumped up on the self-help and the Western theories of like log frames and asset-based community development. And I'm like, suddenly I realized, hey, I have no idea what my Indian roots are. And what is an Indian way to coexist? Not a Western way, but what is an innately culturally sensitive way? And that's when I started finding a response over 3-4 years of exploration, which also brings together a lot of what I have thought about. I call it Indic centrism, right? And that's where I'm going to go into it. So let me start with the word Indic. What is Indic? So typically the word Indic is used for a group of languages that originate from Sanskrit. So you say these are the Indic languages. And recently, Indic is also like one of those, like Hindutva also tends to lean a bit on the word Indic, right? And those are not how I'm looking at Indic. I'm looking at Indic in a very specific context. The specific context comes from our extended cultural experience, right? India has been for a longest time a place of abundance. It's a culture of prosperity. It's a culture, it's a land of crisscrossing rivers. It's a land of abundance. We can't personally take credit for it because it just happened that it was so. But what happens in a culture of abundance is really time to contemplate about life. There is time to think about things, and there is time to understand the spirit and the spiritual. The material then stops becoming an obsession, and rather the spiritual becomes the pursuit. We've had to fight less to survive. We've had time to create beauty, to reflect on things. And this very experience has kind of taught us to coexist. In a culture like India, diversity, especially because of its proximity to nature and the diversity of the nature, is very closely intertwined with life, right? And we're a fertile lab where great souls and spirits have come, saints have come, and really given messages for us to actually carry across generations. These thought streams have coexisted, and the fundamental assumption, I would say, of our culture is that of oneness, ekatva. We are all one. To me, Indic is reclaiming that cultural memory, the cultural memory of our long, long lineage. The culture has unhealthy and healthy aspects. And when I use the word Indic, I'm actively trying to say, let's let go of the unhealthy aspects of our culture. Let go of the oppression, of the systemic injustices that also are a part of our cultural package. So what I'm proposing then is a renewal of our culture to reflect our current realities, building on what is healthy, right? A culture of abundance where there is enough for everybody's need, but not for greed. A culture which does not divide everything, doesn't divide mind and body, doesn't divide human beings and nature, doesn't divide human beings and God. But so not a Cartesian cut culture, but a culture of oneness and seamless flowing, right? And finally, an innately polytheistic orientation, an orientation where many truths can coexist, the anekantvad that we speak about, right? An orientation where two things can be paradoxical and true at the same time, right? These are all ideal conditions for coexistence. So Indic is like a healthy pride in our culture, and at the same time being aware of our collective trauma without being a victim to it, right? It's about standing in sufficiency. So the questions I want to leave with you about being Indic are, what's your idea of India? And like, how Indian are you? How lightly or strongly do you hold your Indianness? And what is an Indic vision for India? What is really an Indian dream for India? Not a Russian dream, not an American dream, not a Chinese dream, but what's an Indian dream for India, for our country? So Indic is a question of that, right? And holding that question alive. Now I go to the center. What is the center? So the center, as I look at it, comes from several ideas with a huge influence of philosophers like J. Krishnamurti. We look at Rumi, and Rumi says that beyond our ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. Right? Beyond our binaries, there is a space where our humanness becomes primary. There's a space where we feel really connected to each other and realize that we have much more in common than separate. Right? So center is the field beyond boundaries. It is a space where truth is not given by an ideology, but by a certain context of what's present here and now. It acknowledges that like fossilized ideologies are inadequate. What we have to do is really to respond with the aliveness of this particular moment. It is a way of living where you have to be constantly in dialogue. And the value that you hold essential is non-violence. Non-violence also includes speaking truth to power, because that's a part of the dialogue that we're talking about. So being centric is a way of, it's a way of being where interface rules are negotiated. We don't need to change each other. We need to negotiate how we coexist, right? And after that, these spaces are also constantly rejuvenating. They're constantly trying to figure themselves out, trying to find their own truth. As a political position, it's not an average between left and right. It is really a three-dimensional space. We're looking at what is the essence and what is the larger frame in which these opposites are fighting with each other. So the invitation is for a more nuanced approach than just thinking the left-leaning and right-leaning, and not look at center as the average, but look at center as an essence of what's common, what's true in this moment. What does the idea of center evoke in you? Is your center inside or outside? Politically, are you left or right-leaning? And what would it take for you to dialogue with the other, which is one of the requisites of being in the center? And if there's one person you have irreconcilable differences with in your life, what would dialogue with them look like? These are some centrist questions that I would leave you with. So a few years ago, I started with rediscovery of India, started having conversations with people around centrism, started realizing that there is a cultural memory that connects us to all of this. And slowly what is emerging is a certain thought stream that has three distinct pieces. The first piece is the ecosystem of organizations. We're realizing that an organization is very limited and can be very self-centered and dedicated to its survival. So we're defining a space beyond organizations, which is the ecosystem space. A gathering like this is also a coming together of many organizations, and I would say is an ecosystem space as well. This is where we're really looking at how can we act together in a decentralized manner without like one organization dictating terms. The ecosystem as a space needs an ideological piece. So the second piece is the ideological piece. This is where I'm doing podcasts with thinkers, having conversations and dialogues where the nuances of this ideology are being fleshed out. And finally, the third piece is a learning journey. A learning journey in our sense takes about 20 years from the time a young person comes out of college all the way to 40. And this 20-year journey would make a person a social activist, a person who's responding to current challenges in their unique style and making a difference. These three, the learning, the ecosystem, and the ideological piece come together with my work in Mumbai. We're currently doing a small lab in Mumbai where we're actually experimenting with a whole range of things which are constructive actions that a centrist movement would typically do on the ground. These labs are experiments of games, citizen audits, citizen actions, manifestos, and so on, where we are saying that this is not just an ideological position, but a very actual lived experience. It's an exciting time, and Indic centrism is a potential response to the challenges of our time. Long-term movements like RSS and the freedom struggle had very deep ideological roots. And I believe that if we, those who seek moderation, those who seek peace, want to build a long-run movement, we have to dig very deep into our roots and draw from there. Rather than trying band-aid solutions and knee-jerk responses, rather than only focusing on self or society, With Indic centrism, the attempt is to build a holistic response to today's times, which is both individual and systemic. I invite you to join in this journey and co-create what could be a possible response to deal with today's times. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Your invitation also invokes questions like the one Deepak has posted on the group. And since we have about 10 odd minutes left to go, we can go through a few questions. Deepak says he finds it inspiring and resonates with the struggles of idea of being Indic and seeking framework and moorings for the. Actually, Deepak, why don't you take it, because you're here? It would be actually nice to have you both talk. Yeah. Why don't you post your question first?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, hi Abhishek. Thank you for a very inspiring presentation. Met some of your Blue Ribbon folks at our recent workshop, so there's a connect there as well. I was just wondering, there is this kind of ongoing struggle, whether it is with the right or left or centric folk politically. I think we're all struggling with this thing of what does it mean to be Indian, and everyone's kind of in a way justifying that position, and there is a polarization, say, between the secularists and the so-called saffronists of this country. But from a centric point of view, can we also then think of also looking at this thing of what is Indian critically, like in the sense that is there really a pure Indianness of sorts, or through the process of our long history, we can, imagine that we are multi already in terms of our cultural influences and the way we dialogue with foreign cultures.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, like I would say, it's a process really of dialogue that. So making peace with the process as a final position, I guess. And I also want to name integral theory or the integral approach. Both Sri Aurobindo and Ken Wilber talk about the integral approach, which also has an additional layer of being able to hold the culture as an object and being able to stand outside our culture and look at its shadows, limitations, and engage with other cultures as well. So I would definitely say that as the newest addition to this integral as an approach is something that I've been exploring and really drawing from all cultures. I feel like a spoiled child who has so much wisdom all around, and like it's like being in a supermarket. You can pick from Kabir and Rumi, and you can pick from the philosophers and everybody, right? So it's a spoiled. Yes, there's so much richness there. So why not? So thanks for bringing that, Deepak.
And we're open for questions to any of our speakers for that matter. Abhishek, of course, but Alex is still around. Bhanwarji is here. Jayanti ma'am is here. So,
Bhanwarji, आपके लिए एक सवाल chat पे था पहले. If you want to respond.
You want to read it out?
Yes, somebody can read it. I think it has gone somewhere. Okay.
Deepak, I think that was your question again. Would you want to repeat it for Bhanwarji?
But I might not be able to do it in Hindi very well. So
since you've translated, maybe you just.
God, I'm terrible at reading Hindi. But Bhanwarji, सवाल ये था कि फिलहाल online अगर हम देखें तो रामदेव पीर जैसे जो संत हैं उनके बारे में जो ऑनलाइन लिखा जा रहा है वो काफी बदल रहा है और फोकस भी काफी बदल रहा है. तो रामदेव पीर की उतनी बात नहीं होती जितनी आज रामदेव बाबा की बात होती है. और ऐसे कई सारे और एग्जाम्पल्स हैं देश भर में. तो इसके बारे में आपका क्या ख्याल है कि ये ट्रेंड कहाँ जा रहा है और हमने क्या करना चाहिए?
धन्यवाद दीपक जी और रुक्मिणी जी. मुझे लगता है कि ये पूरे देश में हो रहा है और रामदेव पीर के साथ भी ये हो रहा है. पिछले 30 साल से ये प्रयास शुरू किया गया कि एक नया रामदेव पीर लोगों के बीच ले जाया जा रहा है. जैसा कि मैंने अपनी टॉक में कहा है कि रामदेव पीर के जो मंदिर होते थे उनमें पहले मूर्तियां नहीं हुआ करती थी, लेकिन अब रामदेव पीर की मूर्तियां आ गई है उसमें, और उनके हाथ में वीणा के बजाय भाला दे दिया गया है। और दूसरा, एक नया किस्म का इतिहास लोगों को बताया जा रहा है कि रामदेव पीर गायों की रक्षा करते हुए औरंगजेब से लड़ करके से युद्ध में मारे गए। अब ये बिल्कुल ऐसी चीज है जिस पर कोई यकीन नहीं कर सकता, क्योंकि रामदेव पीर ने समाधि हुए थे वो, और सब लोग इस सारी चीज को जानते हैं। लेकिन अब जो रिटर्न जो हिस्ट्री है उसमें ये सब चीजें बदली जा रही है, उनके वक्तव्य को बदला जा रहा है, उनकी बातों को बदला जा रहा है। लेकिन ये जो एक नए किस्म का रामदेव पीर बनाने की जो कोशिश हो रही है, वो इसलिए अभी तक सफल नहीं हुई है क्योंकि रामदेव पीर के पूरे उस पंथ में विभिन्न धर्मों का जो मिश्रण है वो बहुत गहरा है। जैसे रामदेव पीर को मानने वाले लोग चंद्र दर्शन करते हैं, वो हर महीने की द्वितीया को, दूज को चांद देखते हैं। तो ये चंद्र दर्शन हो, या उनके मानने वाले जो उनकी भजन करते हैं उसको जम्मा जागरण कहते हैं, जो जुम्मा से मिलता है, और उनको मानने वाले लोग दफनाते हैं, वो अपने अंतिम संस्कार में जलाते नहीं बल्कि वो दफन होते हैं। तो कई चीजें अभी भी ऐसी हैं जिनसे निकल पाना बहुत कठिन होता जा रहा है। लेकिन बावजूद इसके भी रामदेव पीर जैसे सांप्रदायिक सद्भाव के एक बहुत सुंदर समन्वयन को धार्मिक कट्टरता की तरफ ले जाने की पूरी कोशिश की जा रही है, और उनको कहा जा रहा है कि वो हिंदू सूरज थे। अब रेगिस्तान में गाय को क्या बचाएंगे, वहां तो गाय होती नहीं थी, वहां तो ऊंट होते थे, लेकिन अब पूरा इतिहास ही ऐसा बनाया जा रहा है। तो दीपक जी ने जो बिल्कुल चिंता प्रकट की है, ये पूरे देश में जो हो रहा है वो रामदेव पीर के साथ भी हो रहा है। लेकिन रामदेव पीर के मानने वाले जो लोग हैं वो आज भी रामदेव पीर को उसी समन्वयन वाले रामदेव पीर के रूप में जिंदा रखे हुए, और वही उनकी वाणियों में गाया जाता है। लोक में जो स्थापित है, लोगों के दिल में, दिमाग में, जबान पर जो स्थापित है, वो रामदेव पीर तो वही है। लेकिन रिटर्न हिस्ट्री जो बनाई जा रही है वो पूरा सेकुलराइजेशन करने की कोशिश हो रही है।
Right. I think Deben has a question for maybe Abhishek, because what he's saying is, because the problem is systemic, what are the efforts that are being made at the Indic dialogue process to address the deep structural issues of violence and communalism and racism in India? And he wants to thank you for your initiative. Deben, in fact, if you can come on camera, in fact, if I can request everyone to be on camera for a little while we are in this session together, it will be great. Or Abhishek can take this question.
Yeah, I can take it, Deben. Thank you for the question. Very, very preliminary steps, Deben, because the challenge of dialoguing across boundaries, right? I come from a privileged middle class background. I count my privileges as Hindu heterosexual adult Brahmin male. And to truly dialogue across the system, right? And between Samaj Sarkar Bazaar also, I have a little bit of Bazaar and Samaj, but no Sarkar. So to dialogue across these is a very long process. I have realized that I've had to firstly fully own my identity to engage in a dialogue. So to talk to a Dalit friend, for example, I have had to say, okay, I am Brahmin. I embrace my Brahmin identity, and now let us talk. Because that gives a more real, authentic dialogue rather than a sterile, like, let's just talk about what's right, right? So I've had to really, for each of these polarities, to embrace myself and then start. So it's, and we are also dialoguing with a couple from UK because there is colonization. So we're really trying to heal that colonization thing, me and my partner along with a couple. So very, very initial steps to do this. Lot more dialogue is needed. And like precisely you said that the problem is systemic. So even in the way I approach the dialogue itself, I've internalized the system, right? So it takes a while to decondition and dialogue. So yeah, you hit the nail in the right spot of where the challenge lies in truly doing it that way.
Thanks, Abhishek. Do we have any other questions?
I think one question was posed by Bangalore that about the people tree. I think you have asked about duality, something. Bangalore. He's
Yeah.
there. People tree is there.
Yeah. Deepak.
Srinivasan.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi. Yeah.
So,
See,
yeah, sorry,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to reconcile few things because I heard about Indic also and all those things. See, primarily, what is Achintya Veda Veda Tattva, what we're talking about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's, that is the main, what you call doctrine. It is not any ideology. I think Ishq Chakrabarti, she was singing and she sang one last song by Narottam Das Thakura. And that was about Gaurang Mahaprabhu from Bangladesh. And that is all was one region. So basically this divine love, what we call in Bhakti, that is no religion. And that is the main focus. Like actually this, we call as faiths, different, whatever name you may give, because the identity in the spiritual world, the identity in the spiritual plane, that identity is very universal and that is beyond the physical and mental realm. So in this Achintya Veda Tattva, it means that it is reconciling duality, Advaita, Dvaita, everything is reconciled. We are accepting all. That is bridging means you are one as well as you are different. How you are one? You are qualitatively one. That is, although you may be a very small portion or you are part of one divinity, oneness or whatever, one consciousness, supreme consciousness, whatever we may call. So if you are part of it, you are bound to have all those qualities. At the same time, because there is a difference, you have this love. When you call about love, there should be somebody, there are two objects in a love. The person who is loved and the person, a lover and a person who wants to love. So this is how between, we call metaphysics of unlimited love. This is between two atmas, two living entities, which is beyond the physical and mental plane. Okay, and what you call this Indianness, Americanness, with that it is very difficult to bridge even this. Unless we cross this, we transcend and come to the level of that particular thing, there is no question of duality. It's a service surrender mode. For example, this Narottama Das Thakura's, if you understand his journey, it is so much touching that his service mood was such that his master was one of the chief apostle of Gaurang Mahaprabhu, Lokanath Swami. So he, whenever early morning, Lokanath Swami used to pass mother's call, nature's call, and that place he used to clean this Narottama Das Thakura without even being told that this is the service for you. That love was so unconditional. We call this unconditional, that you are not. It is not a transactional love. It is not you are expecting anything in return. Mahaprabhu talks this only. Ashlisha va padaratam. You do anything with me. You can strangle with me. You don't give me result. You may hate me. You may love me. But still, unconditionally, I love you, my God. I mean, he's praying to Krishna. So the point is this sort of surrender, that is complete surrender. At that point, only it is possible when we actually graduate, when we go to that point. So the purpose of all these secondary characteristics, secondary thing is to raise yourself to that point. You develop humility, you develop humbleness, you come out of, as long as we don't shed all this ego and whatever thing, it is not possible for us to realize this oneness. It is not possible to have this complete surrender. So that is why these practices are there in different faiths. So that should not be, and that is we call as Nimitika Dharma and Nitya Dharma when we say that has to do with the function of the soul in relation with one God. So that function is irrespective of wherever part of the world, whichever religion, wherever, that cannot change because that is something coming on a different plane. So here there is no question of gods and there's only one universal God there because it cannot be, there can be only one father and so many children. So this is all reconciled in Achintya Abheda Tattva, we are one and simultaneously. This is the little deep philosophy, but through practice. Your practice in our journey makes a very different, and that is what all the saints and philosophers. In fact, when the Ramdev he was talking, we also have, the Sufi saints and all they are. Actually, we should see what they're actually, how they're practicing to get this connection of divine love with. And that practice, if you try to emulate in your life, at least a fraction of it, a fraction. And it's a question of experience and experiment. It's a self experience. Unless we do this, it will be very difficult for us to theoretical even conceptualize it. This is very important. So these are the some phases are there. So some do chanting, some are doing smaranam, some do meditation. There are different paths, different things prescribed. And these are the things to be encouraged by different faith leaders rather than focusing on, my worship this way, that way. I mean, this is something this is very important. So this way it is possible to reconcile all of them. So that is what it is. Thank you. Is that clear? Or anything we can discuss? And my text is there in the publication. It's a short, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Chavan. I think this is a discussion for a much longer time with a much deeper engagement. We have just about 2 minutes, but Devin has a question or a comment. Is it easy for an individual in a community of them to disconnect from the material mandal world and enter the realm of spiritualism as India's roots on those parts? That does not solve problems. I don't know what you mean by mandal world. I'm guessing it's material world. The systems of violence continue to generate culture of violence. It's more, I think it's a question that needs time.
That's he's talking about the mundane world, I think, something like that.
Right.
That is what he means. That is at the
Abhishek, you want to clarify mandal world?
Debe. Material, yeah. So I think it was a typo. Correct. But unfortunately, we are about, our time in this session is about to end. Devin, if you're hanging around and Jayanti ma'am is still around, maybe, you all can take this conversation to the main room once we go back here and you all can maybe chat. But yes, the next, we will now head for a break though, from 3:30 to 4, we are taking a short tea break, but do come back for a session at 4 o'clock. That's our closing keynote by the very inspiring Mr. Faisal Khan. And we also have a concert after that. So please do not leave. And yes, I thank all our speakers for giving their time and very, very valuable inputs today. It was an extremely enriching session and so many different perspectives, from there's architecture and there's music and there's spirituality, spiritual traditions, there's syncretic traditions. I feel very enriched. So thank you all again. I'm putting in some details on chat, our social media handles. I mean, we really would like, the Seeds of Community to also grow with people like you. Do join us, follow us. Let's keep talking to each other. And yes, let's meet back in the main room. You all can leave the breakout room now, have a quick cup of chai, coffee, and come back at 4 o'clock, please. Hope to see you again. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.